In war, fire is survival, and survival depends on secrets. Before we begin, if you're drawn to the hidden mechanics of history, the forgotten tricks that kept people alive when everything else failed, subscribe. Not because the algorithm demands it, but because stories like this one rarely survive intact. Because during World War II, soldiers carried a fire-starting trick so small, so deceptively simple, that most people today would laugh at it. A razor blade, a battery, and a storm that should have made fire impossible. So the question isn't whether this worked. The question is, why no one talks about it anymore. Imagine this. You're soaked, your hands are numb, wind cuts through wool and bone, matches are useless, lighters are dead, your unit is scattered, night is coming, and fire, real fire, is the difference between life and death. During World War II, Allied soldiers, resistance fighters and covert operatives were trained in a method that bypassed weather, humidity and even freezing rain. Not folklore, not myth, documented, taught, used, and it centered around something disposable, a carbon steel razor blade. At first glance, it sounds ridiculous. How could something designed to shave stubble light a fire in a storm? Because razor blades back then weren't stainless. They were high-carbon steel, thin, reactive, conductive, and paired with the right battery. They became a weapon against the elements. Here's the core of the trick. WWII field kits often included small batteries, flashlight cells, radio spares, or scavenged dry cells from equipment. Usually 1.5 to 3 volts. Harmless, right? Wrong. When a carbon steel razor blade bridges the positive and negative terminals, current surges through the thinnest section of metal. That thin edge becomes resistance. Resistance becomes heat. And well, heat, focused into a razor's edge, does something remarkable. It glows. Not sparks, not embers, incandescence. The blade edge turns red hot in seconds, hot enough to ignite cotton fibres, char cloth, dry grass tucked inside clothing, even paper soaked, dried and carried for emergencies. In rain, in wind, in conditions where friction fails. This wasn't improvisation. This was taught knowledge. British SOE operatives, American OSS agents, resistance cells across Europe. Why? Because matches get wet. Lighters freeze. Friction requires dryness and energy. Electric heat doesn't care. But here's where it gets interesting. You see, this trick wasn't widely shared after the war. It didn't become a Boy Scout lesson. It didn't enter civilian survival manuals. Instead, it faded. Why? Because it exposed something uncomfortable. That modern convenience made us fragile. We traded knowledge for gadgets. And, well, gadgets fail. During the war, soldiers were trained to assume failure. No supply lines, no backup, no rescue. Everything had to be redundant. A razor blade shaved. It cut bandages. It stripped wire. And if needed, it summoned fire from metal. But there's a detail most summaries skip, you know. Not all razor blades worked. Stainless steel? Useless. just too resistant, too corrosion-proof, really. The trick depended on cheap reactive carbon steel, the kind we stopped using because, well, it rusted. Rust is the cost of capability. Now, here's where conspiracy whispers begin. After the war, consumer razor blades shifted almost entirely to stainless steel. Officially, longer lifespan, less rust, better hygiene. Unofficially, a generation lost access to a tool that could create fire from electricity alone. Coincidence? Maybe. But the timing is interesting. Because knowledge that makes people self-reliant doesn't always scale well in peaceful societies. Self-reliance makes people harder to control. And, you know, World War II produced a lot of inconvenient knowledge. The blade trick wasn't flashy. It didn't look heroic. But it worked when nothing else did. And that's dangerous knowledge to forget. So, here's how it was done, conceptually, not as instruction, but as history. Battery terminals exposed, blade held carefully at the ends, never the edge. Edge briefly touching both contacts. Not long, just long enough to glow. Tinder already prepared. Because, you know, fire doesn't wait for fumbling hands. The men trained in this understood something modern life doesn't teach. Preparation beats strength. Knowledge beats gear. And, well, simplicity beats complexity in chaos. Think about it. We live surrounded by power. Yet most people couldn't start a fire without plastic and fuel. Meanwhile, a soak soldier in 1943 could pull warmth from a pocket battery and a sliver of steel. So, who's really advanced, eh? Some veterans, you know, only mention this trick decades later, usually off record. Why? Well, because it sounded unbelievable. Because nobody really wanted to test it. And honestly, because the world just moved on. But, you see, the knowledge didn't disappear. It simply went dormant, just waiting for someone curious enough to ask. How did they survive when everything else failed? And, well, the answer is never glamorous. It's hidden in the small things. A razor blade, a battery, and the understanding that fire isn't magic. It's physics, patient, obedient, and just waiting. So, next time the storm hits and convenience goes dark, ask yourself, what knowledge did we trade away, and who decided we no longer needed it?